and welcome to the PST live stream. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over a simple survey. So we're going to be using a lot of the new objects in eStudio, like the button object, the survey object, the slider object, the slide choice object, those kinds of things. We'll be using a lot of those and a lot of the slide layout templates to show you how to make different kinds of surveys in ePrime. So for those of you following along at home, first thing I'm going to do is open up eStudio. Please note that I'm going to be using ePrime 3.0, obviously, because I'll be using a lot of the new features. If you are interested, what I'm going to be making today is a modified version of the Survey 1 sample that you get when you download ePrime 3. So what I do recommend doing, if you want to see kind of the end goal of this, if you're not really following along, or if you want to see what this is going to look like in the end, open up the Survey 1 sample. That can be found here. If you just go to your documents, go to My Experiments, go to 3.0, and then Samples, you should see Survey 1 right here. And this is kind of the end goal for today. Now it's going to be a little bit of a modified version. If you take a look at this experiment, it's going to be a little bigger. There's a lot of demographic questions at the beginning. I've actually truncated those down to 3 instead of I think there are 5. I've truncated it down to 3. And those 3 demonstrate the different types of survey objects that you can make in ePrime. So it's going to be a pretty, it'll be a good overview of all of the different ways to use the survey objects in ePrime. It just won't cover the same scope that the Survey 1 sample does. But if you would like to see a finished version of the product, just know that it's right there. All right, so I am at first going to start out with a blank template. I'm going to click OK. Just give it a second to load. All right, so once it loads, the first thing I'm going to do is just welcome participants to the experiment. The point of this survey is that it could be run either on a computer, like the one that I'm running on right now, with a mouse object as the response object, but it could also be used on a touchscreen because everything that I'll be adding today is going to be one of our survey objects, either a slide choice, slide slider, or slide button, and those are all really easy to add or to use as a touchscreen. So in the session proc here, we're actually going to take a slide object and drag it to the far left. It'll be called slide 1. And I'm going to rename this one just to instructions. This one's just going to be some very basic instructions for the user, just, what you're going to be doing in this task. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on it to open up an eStudio's workspace. Let's go ahead and make some instructions. So to do that, I will take a slide text sub object, throw it really anywhere on my screen here. I'll adjust all the settings later, but I'm going to go ahead and start typing. Alright, so just some very basic instructions. Welcome to the task. First, we'll be collecting some demographic information. Press the continue button to get started. So now the user knows exactly what, or the participant knows exactly what they're going to be doing. Now, as you can see, this slide text sub object is a little small. Not all of my text fits here. So what I can do is I can just stretch this so it is much bigger. Now note with slide text sub objects, what they'll do is they'll kind of compress everything until you double click on it. Then it'll show you the spacing as it'll show up when you actually run, so the spacing at runtime. I'm going to move this up just a little bit, and that's going to be exactly what I want. Now if you read this, it'll say press the continue button to get started. So I need to add a continue button. To do that, we'll click on the slide button sub object, and I will add it just under the slide text sub object here. And it says the continue button, so I have to make a slight change to this. So if you click on the button and click on the sub-object properties page button at the top of the page here, I go into the functionality of this button as well as its relation to whatever appears in this pane. I go into that a little more in the other live streams, so if you're interested, definitely give those a look. But if you click on this slide sub-object properties page icon, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the name from button 1 to continue. That way it shows up in my response data as the participant having clicked continue. And I will go to theme, because the theme is how you change all of the individual properties of the actual button object itself. Right now the parent theme is base button. which is exactly what I want because I just want this to look like this black text on a gray button. And if I go to text, it allows me to change the text that appears on the button. And I can change what the text says, I can change the font color, I can change what the font is, the size, whether it's bold, italic, underline, or strikeout. In this instance, I'm just going to change my text to continue. Now, whenever you make a change to one of these properties here on the theme tab, what it'll do is it'll actually appear in bold. That doesn't mean it's going to appear in bold on the slide button itself. It just means that this is not the same as the parent theme. So the base button parent theme, the text for the base button parent theme is just the word button. But since I changed it to continue, ePrime is going to highlight that this is a change between the base button theme that I'm using and something that I've actually done here. So if I click apply, you're going to see continue instead of a button. So click OK. And now all I have to do is just resize the button. So I will take these little fill handles here, make it just a little bigger so that word continue looks a little nicer inside that button. And that's it. That's all I had to do to make a clickable button in ePrime. It's pretty easy. So now all you have to do is go to the properties page at the top left-hand corner, because I like participants to be able to read this for as long as they need. I'll go to my duration input tab and I'll change my duration to infinite. That way participants can look at this as long as they need and then click the continue button whenever they're ready to actually start the task. I'm going to change my data logging to standard because not only did I change the response, so I made it so that whenever they click continue, it actually logs continue in my data file, but I would like to also see how long they've been on this object. So how long was this first screen open? And that actually, that'll help me get through the people who are just like tapping continue really quickly to move on. I'm going to click add here in input masks because I want to make that button what terminates the slide. So I will click add and I have my list of input devices here, keyboard, mouse, and button. Now regardless of whether or not I'm using a mouse to respond or if I'm using a touchscreen to respond, I'm going to want my input mask to be this button object. I'm going to click OK. What this allows me to do is this allows me to run the task on this computer using this mouse here, but then if I take it to a tablet and use it as a touchscreen, this will also work because I'm not using specifically the mouse, I'm using the button object as an input mask. I'm going to make sure here that my allowable is set to the default. That little asterisk character there, all that means is that any response made to any button, so any click that I've made to any button, is going to count as my response or be my allowable response. And in this instance, I only have one button, just continue. So I'm going to keep my allowable as that, and click apply and OK. And that's all I need to do. So now that I have my instructions made, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to collect age-related data. So I'm going to ask participants as part of the demographic information what their age is. So I am going to make, in my session proc here, I'm going to make another slide object. And this one's just going to be called age. And I'm changing the name just by clicking F2 and typing the word age. You can also rename it by right-clicking and clicking rename. The way that these properties work in ePrime is that you have the actual property itself there, but then if you look to the right here, this is its kind of keyboard shortcut. So rename is F2, obviously delete is delete, and copy is Control-C. So go ahead and double click on this to open it in our workspace here. Now what I can do is I can add each of these components individually like I did in my instructions page. I added the slide text subobject and then I added the button itself. But new to ePrime 3, we have these things called slide layout templates. What slide layout templates do is they are actually pre-rendered slide objects that allow you to quickly and easily make perfectly spaced and perfectly programmed, so the duration input tab is correct, all the input masks are correct, slides that have different features on them. So if I click on the slide layout templates drop down here, you can see I have a lot of options. So I have some multiple choice options, I have some rating scale options, and I even have some rating scale with a slider options. Now this is actually what I'm going to want for this, because I want participants to interact with the slider and move it from left to right to indicate their age for me. So I'm actually going to do this one, this 10-point show value all labels text prompt. And it says, are you sure you want to insert the slide layout template? I will say yes. And it takes a second because what it's doing right now is it's drawing objects to the screen, and it's also changing the duration input tab, and I'll show you that a little later. But if I click OK, I now have a pre-formatted slide subobject, or slider subobject. Now all I need to do here is I don't need the survey header, question instruction, the question prompt. That's actually going to come later, and I'll show you how to interact with those a little while later. But for now, all I really need is this question instruction. So I'm going to delete the survey header by highlighting it, by clicking on it and clicking delete. I'll do the same for question prompt. But for instruction, I'm just going to type slide the bar to indicate your age. And I'm going to stretch this out just a little bit to center that and move it up just a little bit on the screen. Alright, so now my slider is just set from 1 to 10, which, I mean, I'm assuming most of you watching this video are older than 10 years old, so you're probably going to want this to be a different type of scale, or a different scale with a different set of range. So I'll do that by clicking on it once and clicking on the SlideSlider subobject properties page icon. Now here's where I can change some of the properties of my slider. First, I want to change the minimum value. I will change it to 25. That's in line with what the sample shows. I know it's a little high for a minimum age, at least for this instance, but we'll keep it there. My maximum value in this case is going to be 90. Again, a little high, but it's consistent with our sample. My major tick units, instead of being 1, I'm actually going to set those to 5. And my minor tick units, I'll set those to 1, but we won't be showing minor tick units. And I'll go ahead and click Apply and OK. And now you can see my scale change. It now goes from 25 to 90. And it's a little bit scrunched here, so I'm actually going to stretch this out. So right now, you can see I have all of these major tick units from 5 to 90. Of course, you can go anywhere in between those, but I'm not showing any of my minor values. If I did, the scale is going to look a little messy, and I'll show you about that. So if I click on that, I can go to Appearance here. And under my appearance, it allows you to show exactly what tick marks, how they look like, how they're spaced in the actual slider itself, and whether or not they appear. So my minor tick appearance right now is set to no. But if I set that to yes, you can now see that I have all of these different values in between my 25 to 30, between 30 and 35, and there are obviously 4 because in this property right here, my minor tick units are currently set to 1 and my major tick units are set to 5. So this is just those incremental values in between. I know some people would like to get this like level of precise, especially in relation to these sliders. In this case, I'm actually going to turn those those minor tick units off though. I just think it looks like a much cleaner slider this way. And I'm going to put this next button right underneath here. This could be next, this could be continue, that is entirely up to you. It really doesn't matter which one those are as long as it's consistent. I'm going to keep this as next just because it's consistent with the slide layout template. I'm going to click on the properties page icon in the upper left hand corner and just take a look at my duration input tab. Right now I only have one object here in my input masks. It's set to button and my allowable is set to next. Now the one thing that you will notice though is that there's nothing in my input mask that specifies that slider. And for those of you who are used to the way that ePrime2 worked, especially in relation to all the other input masks, it's going to seem like this isn't collecting data just yet, but it totally is, and I'm going to show you why. If you go to the logging tab, every time you add a slide slider or a slide choice to ePrime, the logging tab actually populates with these new pieces of data right here. So slider1.acc, slider1.changeCount, slider1.rt, rt time and response count. This is how you're going to get that data for that slider that you added. It's not going to be on the duration input tab at all. It's actually going to be in this logging tab. And what's more, if we take a look at the general tab here and we look at input source, we can actually change what the RT value, the accuracy, and the response value for the slide object is, or how it's going to appear in your data file. So right now, the RT value and the accuracy and the response value, those are actually going to be for the next button. So I'm going to get information in my logging tab called slider1.acc, and that's going to show me all of the all of the response and timing related information for the slider itself. But my age.rt is going to be entirely related to that next object. And I know some people want that just to know how long they've been playing around with the slider until they've moved on. But if you don't care when they click the next button and the only thing you care about is what they clicked on the slider itself, if I change this input source value under resp to slider1, now age.resp is going to equal the value that they selected on the slider. And same with age.rt and same with age.acc. And that's actually what I'm going to set this to right now, because I don't necessarily care about when they clicked the next button. I just care how they answered this question. So I'm going to keep this change with apply and OK. And that's all I need for my slider. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run this task right now, just to make sure that this part works. This is kind of how I recommend approaching rather complex tasks like this. As you see, this is actually going to get exponentially more complicated, and especially if this is your first time working with SlideSliders, it's always good to, or these slide survey objects, it's always good to just do a little bit at a time, test it, make sure it works, and then move on to the rest of the experiment. So I am going to go ahead and save this. I'm just going to save this in e'Prime3, and this is just going to be called simple survey sample. All right, and I'm going to run quickly in windowed mode. So what I did to run in windowed mode is I clicked on this windowed mode button, and then this allows me to determine what I'm going to be running. And I'm going to click test. If you'd like more information on this, I do talk about it in some of my other live streams as well, so feel free to check those out. But I'm going to go ahead and click test. I don't need to log any data for this, just I'm worried about functionality. So click continue, and then make sure my slide slider is working. And it looks like it's working fine. Click next. And I can take a look here. While that was up, I could actually see what my age.rt, age.response, age.reaction time, those kinds of things, I could actually see what those were. So I'm going to click exit there, but it looks like everything's functioning exactly how I want it. So we'll go ahead and add the next object. So the next one I'm going to add is race. Just general demographic question. So I am going to take my slide object, put it just after age, and I'm going to rename this one from slide 1 to race. And hit enter. I'm going to double click on it to open it in eStudio, or open it in the workspace here. And then I'm going to make a, this one is actually just going to be a multiple choice slide choice sub-object. It's going to be relatively similar to the age in its layout, but it's going to be different. So instead of having a slider from one side to the other, it's actually just going to be a multiple choice object. So I can add that, again, I can add that piecemeal, kind of spend a long time showing you the different ways to go about this, or I can click on the slide layout template and just select 5-item single selection. And I click OK. Do I want to add the SLT? Yes, I do. And then it says slide layout template applied to your experiment. I'm going to click OK. So again, similar to age, I don't need survey header. I don't need question prompt. All I need is question instruction. That is going to be at the top, and this is going to be a slightly longer question. I double click on this, and I will say, with which race do you identify? Select all that apply. And now all I need to do is change this slide subobject, or this slide choice subobject. Since it's already created for me, I don't need to go through the hassle of actually making it and getting it to this point. I just have to change some of the values of the properties. And that's pretty easy to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this once and click on the properties page. Now, what's displayed to participants here is called the label, and that's what I'm going to need to change. So I am going to make one, or I'm going to be just changing the labels quickly. I'll read them once I'm done. So I've made all my labels here, and I want to add one more. So 5 wasn't enough. I want to actually have an option to just skip this question. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the number of rows that I have. Right now my rows is set to 5. If I change this to 6 and click apply, you'll see that I actually have a new item underneath. This works, if you're familiar with our list objects, this is going to look really similar to one of those. But I'm going to change item 6 just to skip this question. Just if the participant doesn't feel comfortable enough responding. So my labels are American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, white, or skip this question. There we go. So that's all I need to do, and if I click apply, you'll see that, apply and OK, you'll see that now all of my new items are in my SlideChoice sub-object, and obviously I'm going to have to resize it. And I'll make this one nice and big because some of these words are pretty long, or choices are pretty long. Now, right here it says select all that apply. But if you're familiar with how certain objects in computers work, you'll see that these are radio buttons. And the way the radio buttons work is you can only actually select one instead of multiple. So we'll have to change that. To do that, all we do is click on the SlideChoice sub-object, click on the Slide sub-object properties icon on the top of the screen there, and we will change single selection property. Single selection determines whether or not it is a radio button or a checkbox. We'll change it from yes to no, so now participants can have multiple choices. Click apply and OK, and now you'll see that these change to checkboxes, and that's exactly what we need. I'm going to take this next button and drag it to the middle of the screen, kind of where it was for my age, kind of right there, just so it's in relatively the same place. Let's go ahead and take a look at the duration input properties just to make sure they're what we want. So we'll start with input source. Right now it's already changed to choice 1 for us instead of input mask. That's exactly what I want. That's a change I would have made had I had the choice to change it. I am going to go to my duration input tab, and my duration I'm going to change from infinite, or I'm going to keep to infinite, sorry, I actually like that. Data logging is set to standard. My input mask devices is set to button, and my allowable is set to next. That's exactly what I want. Go ahead and take a look at the logging tab just to make sure that I'm logging everything I want. Choice 1 accuracy, choice 1 RT, choice 1 RT time, those kinds of things. That's exactly what I want. So I'm going to keep all of those, and I'm going to click OK. So now it looks like my SlideChoice object is all set. My race question is done. So the next one that I'm going to do is employment, and this is actually going to be the last one that I do. As far as demographic information is concerned. So I'll double click on the session proc here. I'm going to add a new slide object, and this one is just going to be called employment. And this one's going to be similar to my race, but it's actually going to be much easier because it's going to require far fewer changes. So I'm going to add a new slide layout template. It's going to be a 5-item single selection, and I would like to insert this SLT. Again, this is exactly the same as last time. My survey header can go away, my question prompt can go away, and I will move question instructions to the top and just change this to indicate your employment status. Now all I need to do is just change these items again. Click on this properties page, and instead of item 1, I'll put not employed. Item 2, employed part-time. Item 3, employed full-time. And item 4, retired. Now, since in the last survey that I did, or the last SlideChoice sub-object that I did, I needed one extra row, I actually don't need this one at all. So all I do is go to rows, and I change them from 5 to 4, click apply, and it actually gets rid of that row. And if you highlight it, you can actually click remove to, and it'll remove it for you. So I will click apply and OK, because that's all I need to do. And now I just need to resize this to make it look a little nicer. So I'll go ahead and drag and drop this. And once I've dragged and dropped it, it looks really nice. This is exactly what I need here. So I'll take my next button, and I will put it just under my SlideChoice object, just to make sure it looks good. I'll do one last check of my properties here. They look identical to the race slide I just made, so I don't need to change any of that. Click OK, and I'm done. All right, so now that's all I need for the demographic information. So I'm going to make one more slide object. Sorry, not text display. One more slide object just with text thanking them for collecting that information. And then I'm going to move on to the actual bulk of the survey. So I'm going to make one more slide in my session proc after employment. I'm going to change it from slide 1 to task instructions, because this is actually going to be the instructions for the task part of the experiment, not just the demographic part. Go ahead and double click on it, make a quick slide text sub-object, and I'm just going to start typing. I'll format it all later. So you will now be asked questions. A few questions. Whoops, questions. Please respond as honestly as possible. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and expand this just to make sure that it fills up my screen. I'm going to space these out just a little better because I don't have too much on this. And I'm going to add one more row that says click, continue to begin. Perfect. So now I'm going to make a slide button, add it just below there, and this change is going to be exactly like our instructions screen here, where I'm just going to make this continue. So I'll click on the button, click on theme, change text from button to continue, click apply and OK, and just resize this. That is way too big. Go ahead and resize that just to be exactly what I want. Perfect. All right, so now what I'm going to do is going to be a little more complicated than what we've been doing so far. I'm actually going to make a slide choice object that'll cycle through not only what type of questions being asked, but it'll cycle through what questions being asked, and then how large the slide text sub-object or slide choice sub-object is going to vary per trial and per question. This shows that instead of having, let's say, employment and race like this, where they're very similar, but they're different objects, you can actually have one object and just change it all the time. So I'm going to do something like that. So my session proc, the first thing that I'm actually going to add is going to be a block list. This is going to follow, I know I've talked about this in just about every live stream that I've done so far, but it's actually going to follow this data file structure of session, block, and trial. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to get a list object and put it just after task instructions. This is going to be called BlockList. And I'm going to hit enter here. And the only thing that's going to be on my block list is just a reference to a procedure called BlockProc. If you've been following along with our live streams, this is going to look really familiar, this structure. It's what we do in just about every ePrime experiment. It's our recommended structure. If you'd like to learn more about this, I definitely recommend checking out our other live streams because we do go into this in a lot more detail there. In BlockProc, I'm going to make another list object, and this one is going to be called TrialList. Again, this is where where some of our demographic data is going to be held. Or not demographic, some of my independent variables are going to be held. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cycle between whether participants receive questions about traveling or whether participants receive questions about pets. And I'm actually going to have essentially a pool that participants can choose from of questions, or that is chosen from to display to participants of questions. So at first this is going to look a little nonsensical, and then I'm going to make it make sense in the end, I promise. So I'm going to close all of these, and I'm actually going to take a list object and drag it directly into my empty workspace here instead of on the experiment timeline. What this does is it actually makes the list object in my unreferenced eObject section, which is exactly where I want it to live right now. Because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be referencing these lists later in my trial list object. And in order for them to be referenced later, they need to live somewhere, and they shouldn't be on the in the structure at all. They need to be in the unreferenced eObject section. So I'm going to change list 1 to pets list. This is my list object that's going to hold all of my pet-related questions, and then their associated slide choice items. All right, so I'm going to keep procedure blank because procedure is going to be handled by the trial list, not actually by the unreferenced eObject, or not by the list that I'm going to have here. So the next thing that I'm going to add is just going to be called question. So I will add an attribute called question, and hit enter. I'm going to expand that because these questions might get a little long. And the first question I'm going to ask is, do you currently own any pets? Do you currently own any pets? And this is just going to be a very simple yes or no. So it's just going to be a 2-item slide choice sub-object with yes as one and no as the other. So I'm going to make an attribute, and I'm going to call this one choice 1, because it is going to be the item for choice 1. This one's going to be yes. I'm going to make one more for choice 2. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to name this one choice 12. I'm going to rename that to choice 2. There we go. And this one's going to be no. And I want to add one more attribute, and this is going to be single selection. So this is going to determine if participants have a check mark or a checkbox like we did for race, or if they have radio buttons like they did for employment. And this one, since you can't have both have a pet and not have a pet, I guess unless you're Schrodinger, bad joke, I'm going to actually make this one a radio button. So this one is going to be single selection, and that will be set to yes. And I would like this to actually appear in this list object in between question and choice 1, so I can do that. All I have to do is highlight it and drag it over here. This little red line indicates where it's going to show up in my list object, and I drop it there, and now I have single selection set to yes before choice 1 and choice 2. Now the only other change that I need to make is I need to determine the number of rows and the number of columns that are going to be in this slide choice object. Because like I said, this is going to be adaptive, so this question will only have 2 choices. But the next question I ask is going to have way more, so I'm going to want to edit this to match that. So I'm going to add an attribute here. This is going to be called numRow. And my row is only going to be 1, yes or no. And if I add one more attribute and call this numColumn and hit enter, this will be the number of columns, and this will be 2. So since my row is going to be 1, it's just going to be a single row with yes on one side and no on the other side, and I think that's going to look pretty good. So now that I have my first question already programmed, I just want 2 more. So they're going to be a little more complicated than this one though. So I'm going to click Add Level, and this question is going to be, how many pets have you owned in your lifetime? Now, if you find that you type a question out like this and you can't actually see it whenever you're editing it, there's a way to resize these, and it works just the same way that it works in Excel. If you take your cursor and hover it in between or to this little expander icon here, if you double click on it, it'll actually resize this automatically, and it'll snap it to the longest possible value. In this instance, it's going to be how many pets have you owned in your lifetime, so it'll snap it to be that size. So for this row, single selection will be set to yes, because I'm only going to be selecting 1. And my options here are going to be 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 9, and 10 plus. Now if you notice, that's way more than 2 choices, so I'm going to have to add a few more. This one actually goes all the way up to 5 different choices, so I will add 3 more. So I'm going to click the Add Multiple Attributes button. How many attributes would I like to add? I'm going to click 3, and I'm going to rename this to Choice 3. Choice 4, and Choice 5. Now again, I kind of want all my choices to stay together. I don't want numRow and numColumns kind of in the middle there, so I'm going to take them and just move them to the very end of my list object here, just to keep all of my choice objects in the same place. Now choice 1 is going to be 0 to 1. Choice 2 will be 2 to 3. Choice 3 will be 4 to 5. Choice 6 will be 6 to 9. And choice 5 will be 10 plus. Now what I'm going to have to do here is, since I have choice 1 and choice 2 set to no and yes for my first question, I want to actually make these rows blank instead of question mark. They won't show up when it comes to when it actually comes to runtime, they won't show up as question mark. But this, I think, just looks cleaner if there's nothing there instead of having a question mark there. And I actually like the way that that's formatted much better. So I'm going to change my num rows then for how many pets have you had in your lifetime. Instead of having one row and all of these choices displayed along one row, I'm going to actually have 5 rows and 1 column. What this is going to do then is it's going to make a survey or a slide choice object that looks a little bit like this. And that's kind of how I want that formatted anyway. So I have one more question I want to ask that's pet related. So go ahead and click Add Level. My question for this is going to be, what kind of pets have you owned? Check all that apply. I'll double click on this just to resize this so I can see the whole question. Single selection is going to be no in this case because I'm selecting all that apply instead of just selecting one. And I'm actually going to go all the way up to 10 options here. So I have 5, I'm going to add 5 more. And I'm just going to change this from, I'm just going to change the names of these attributes to choice 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Choice 10. All right, I'm going to take my num row and num column again and just drag them to the very end. And I'm going to delete these question marks from my unused rows here because only this last one is going to have up to 10 values. Now, just start making up animals. I have a cheat sheet here that tells me the animals from the survey, so I'm just going to be copying those. So cat. Dog, iguana, horse. Whoops, I spelled horse wrong. There we go. Horse, bird, fish, snake, chinchilla, and other. There, so those are all of my options for possible animals, and I even have other there. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually have 2 columns of options. I want it to look a little bit like this, but I would like one column to be 5 and another column of 5. I just think that looks nice. So my number of rows will be 5, and my number of columns will be 2. And I don't necessarily need to present all of these questions in sequential order. I don't really think it matters. So I'm going to change sequential selection to random by clicking on Properties page, going to Selection, and changing my order to random, clicking Apply and OK. And that's all I need for that pets list. Like I said, this pets list, and then I'm going to make another one called travel list. This is actually just going to be, like I said, my kind of pool of questions from which my experiment is choosing. So now that I have my pets list, I'm going to do the exact same thing to a travel list. So I'm going to close all of those. Take a list object, drag it, and drop it into the workspace. Again, it will show up in unreferenced D objects. That's exactly what we want, and I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to keep procedure completely blank there, and I'm just going to format it like I did pets list. So what I could do is I have the option of making all of those things manually again. But I know that it's going to be formatted very similar to pets list. I'm going to have a question, and I'm going to have single selection, all of my choices 1 through 10, and then num row and num column. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to highlight all of these using this cursor here. Click Control-C on my keyboard, go to list 1, I'm going to add an attribute quick, and then highlight just this one and click Control-V. Now what that does is it actually makes all of the attributes that I need and fills them in with the values that I already have for my pets list. Now that part's less than ideal. I don't need that, so I can actually highlight all of this and delete it from there. So now these are just empty values. But what this does do is it actually sets up my structure of the list object, so I don't have to keep clicking add attribute, add attribute, add attribute. So my first attribute, if we look at the pets list, is going to be question. Next one is my single select. And I'm actually going to hop back to my pets list just to make sure that this is the same, and it's not, it's single selection. So I'm going to make sure that that's the same. There we go. And then these are my 10 choices. So choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, choice 8, choice 9, and last but not least, choice 10. And then if I look at my pets list one more time, I notice I have num row and num column here. So I just need to make that. So num row and num column. Check out pets list one more time just to make sure that these are the same, and they are. And I'm actually going to rename list 1 from list 1 to travel list. Again, I like the name to follow the function. List 1 is perfectly acceptable. I just know that it's about travel, and I like to keep all of my naming schemes similar to that. So, for my first question, it is going to be, how often do you travel? This is going to be a single selection question. And as far as my choices are concerned, I'm going to have never, once per year, several times per year, monthly, and weekly. And I'm going to keep my other choices blank here. So this means that my number of rows is going to be 5, and my number of columns is going to be 1. This is going to look really similar to that employment survey object that we made. And if I double click on choice 3, it will actually expand several times. Oh, several times per year. Make it several times per year. There we go. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is going to be, to which countries have you traveled? Select all that apply. Since they're selecting all that apply, single selection in this case is going to be no. And I'll just start listing some countries. Again, I have a cheat sheet, so I'm just going to be following what's on the survey object. Feel free to make up your own countries. Argentina, Bulgaria, China, Denmark, England, France, Germany, Holland, Iceland, or other. And I'm going to keep choice 10 as other. So for my number of rows, I'm going to keep this one at 5, and my number of columns is going to be 2. This is going to end up being formatted exactly like my what kind of pets have you owned checklist, where I have 2 columns, a column of 5 next to a column of 5, and they can select as many as they want from those. And now my last question is going to be, do you enjoy traveling? And this will be just like my yes or no question for my pets list. It will, of course, be single selection, and choice 1 will be yes, and choice 2 will be no. My number of rows will be 1, and my number of columns will be 2, just so they can be next to each other on the same line whenever they're presented. So now that I have both of my list objects set up, I am going to actually change the selection method of this one again from sequential to random. Click apply and OK. And that's all I need. So now I have 2 separate pools of list objects that I'm going to be choosing from. So now I need to reference this in my trial list. And I can do that actually by going by doing something that we call nested lists. So it's taking these list objects and nesting them inside this one. So this list object then has access to all of the information that I've put in these list objects. We actually have a really great YouTube video on nested lists. If you'd like to learn more about that, please definitely feel free to do that. Otherwise, if you have questions while I'm doing this, feel free to give me a shout out and I'd be happy to answer those as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have users answer all of my questions for each one of these sets of list objects. To do that, I'm going to need to vary what is in this nested column, because I have a couple of options for setting this up. One of my options is I could sit here and click add level and make 6 levels and reference different lists manually in this list object. Or I could go to my block list here. I could make a new attribute. This is going to be called question type. And this will have 2 levels. Question type for the first one will be travel, and question type for the second one will be pets. Now, if I jump into my trial list, I'm going to have my nested list be an attribute reference to that question type. Whoops, no, I do not want to create that. It's either going to be question type travel or question type pets. So my nested here will be question type, end bracket, and then list. So now, under my nested here, it's actually going to show up as a question mark. Now, question type is going to resolve as to either pets or travel. And that's going to concatenate itself, or kind of mush itself together with the word list, so then it will be filled in with either pets list or travel list. I'm going to set the weight on this to 3 because each one of my list objects here has 3 questions associated with it. And if I make sure that in my block list I have 2 levels, travel and pets, now all of my participants are going to get every single one of these questions, just in a different order. Right now they're going to get travel first and pet second, but if I want to also vary whether they get travel first or pet second or pets first and travel second, all I would have to do then is change my selection method from sequential to random. This kind of gives me another level of control as to how participants are seeing my questions. So now, not only am I randomizing whether or not they see pets first and travel second or travel first, pet second, but I'm also randomizing the order in which they see those questions. And that's why I set the experiment up in this structure, is it allows me that extra level of control over all of those objects. So since I have all of my information filled in my pets list and my travel list, the only thing I really need to do in my trial list here is just make a procedure. My procedure is just going to be called trialProc, just to stick with our standard naming convention. I'm going to click yes to make this procedure. And yeah, I'll make the default value for newly created levels. There aren't going to be any more, but why not? Now my TrialList is going to look really, really empty. All I'm going to do is just make a slide object. This slide object is just going to be called question. And if I double click on it, now is when I have to start making a lot of changes to it, just to kind of match what we have in these pets list and this travel list. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this kind of as broad of a possible template as I can. So my biggest option in each one of these lists is a 5-row, 2-column slide choice sub-object, with each one of these choice 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 being my different items. So that's what I'm going to set up on this question here. And if you look, I actually have my question in the list object as well. So this is going to look a little sparse. So I'm going to start with a slide layout template just because it's easier and it gets all the spacing right for me. So I'm going to do 10 item multiple selection. I do want to change the SLT, or add the SLT. I'm going to click OK. Now, I'm going to keep my question instruction here and keep my question prompt underneath. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first say, please answer the following question related to, and then I'm going to have my question type attribute referenced here. So now at the top, if it says pets, it'll say, please answer the following question related to pets. If it's travel, it'll say, please answer the following question related to travel. I'm going to expand this just so it is like a little banner at the top of my screen here. There we go. And now I want the actual question to appear below it. So instead of having to type it out, all I do is make an attribute reference to question. For those of you who are using an older version of ePrime, what this is something called the trib sense. It actually pulls all the attributes that you've made from list objects, whether they're in unreferenced or they're in the actual structure of the experiment, and it also looks for attribute references that are made in script object as well, or in script as well. So this is just going to be question, and I'm going to expand this because I know that some of my questions are a little longer, and I would like to have ePrime, or like ePrime, to have more than enough room to present the question. I'm going to expand on this one as well. It seems a little cramped, and some of my options are a little longer, specifically chinchilla. That's a pretty long one. So I'm going to expand this one so it's a little bigger. There's plenty of room to respond. And now what I have to do is I have to start filling in each of the properties on my slide choice subobject with the properties that I've been setting in my list objects. So single selection, my choices, and my numbers of rows and numbers of columns. Those are all going to be attribute references. So if I click on this, I'm actually going to put before rows, I'm going to make an attribute reference to my num rows. Or num row. Which one is it? It is num rows, and I'm going to make sure with that as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do num rows, and then I'm going to do a colon here and put 5 afterwards. Now what this does is this tells E prime, this is the value that you're going to ultimately resolve to. You're going to resolve to the value that's in my num rows attribute in that list object. But if I do colon 5 afterwards, this actually tells E prime, but temporarily just for design time, make sure that you have 5 up. So I'm not actually going to see my change here until I run the experiment and it cycles through the different rows. But I'll show you here, if I change rows from 5 to, let's say, 6, it's going to add those temporarily, and it's going to show item 6 and item 12 here. So this colon and everything afterwards is just what appears during design time. Click apply, and I'll remove these two since I don't need them. Perfect. I'm going to do the same thing for num columns. And I do that colon there, and my num columns is going to be 2. Of course, that's going to change per question. So that is exactly why I open these. It says num row and num column, not plural, so I'm going to hop back in here and just change that quickly. Num row and num column. An easier way to do that too, instead of opening up the object that you've already made, is if instead of your structure window in the Experiment Explorer here, you just have attributes open. Then you can see the name of all the attributes that you've made, and I'm actually going to keep that one open because that's a little more helpful for me right now since I'll be referencing so many attributes. So now that I have my num row and num columns, the other one that I have here is single selection. So single selection instead of yes or no is going to be my attribute reference that I made. And currently I'll just set that to no for design time. So it's not going to look like there's any change, but that's exactly what that did. And then now all I need to do is just change my labels here. And those are going to be my choice 1 through 10 that I made earlier. So I'll make some attribute references. Now what I could do is I could type out choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, and type all of those out. Just kind of manually like I had done this one, and it's going to take a long time. What I could do is I could actually copy and paste these and just change the number at the end. Just another little trick for designing these things a little faster. And choice 10. Perfect. So I'll click apply and OK, and you're going to see these change. Now what this is going to do is, since it looks like this at design time, it's not going to look like much right now. But when I run the experiment, these are all going to change. So the number of choices that I have, the question that I have, even whether these are checkboxes or radio boxes, those are all going to change at runtime. So since I had mentioned that every time I make kind of a major change to any part of my task, I want to run it to make sure that it works correctly. I'm going to run this to make sure it works correctly. So I'm going to click Save here, and then click Run in windowed mode, and then click Test. I'm just going to run that without logging any data. Click Continue. I'll select my age. I'll put me right around 55. I'll skip this question. I am employed full-time. Now, this is my pets question. So, what kind of pets have you owned? Check all that apply. I've actually had a cat, dog, a fish, and a chinchilla. Click continue. Do I currently own any pets? As you can see, my attribute reference to pets is working well. My adaptation of the slide choice object is working pretty correctly there, so this is exactly what I want. I do own a pet. And how many pets do I own in my lifetime? Probably too many to count. So I'm going to click next. So now, as you can see, it actually switched over my traveling questions. Do I enjoy traveling? I definitely have. How many countries have I been to? Just click the ones that apply here. There we go. And then how often do I travel? As often as I can. And then click next. So that all looks like it's working exactly the way I want it to. So I'm going to click exit. Make sure that that all still looks good here. There wasn't really anything that I recommend changing except for this task instructions. If you saw when I was running this, the task instructions showed up really fast and then went away. I didn't have an option to click this continue button. And that's because when I went into my properties page here, on my duration input tab, I didn't change anything. So I'm going to change duration to infinite. I'm going to change my devices to a button device so I can actually click on the continue button instead of it just appearing and moving on quickly. And I'll change data logging to standard just to make sure that I have that data. And I'll click OK. Now my task should work exactly the way I want it to. Oh, I've also been informed that I spelled survey wrong in my experiment there. Thank you very much for catching that. I'll be renaming that after the live stream. Thank you. So in my session proc, the only thing that I want to add now is just a goodbye slide. So I'll take a slide object, add it just after my block list here, and I will change it from slide 1 to goodbye. There we go. Double click on it to open it, and I'm going to add a slide text sub object that just says, thank you very much for taking our survey. Have a wonderful day. And then I'm going to go ahead and expand this. And I'm going to make this spaced out a little better there. And I'm just going to keep this on the screen for its default duration of 1,000 milliseconds, just so participants see it. They don't necessarily have to respond to this at all. So that's all that I need to do to make a simple survey in ePrime. What I do recommend doing if you're following along at home, go ahead and run this survey or run what we've made. Go ahead and take a look at the data file, see how it's going to be logged, and just know that for this object here, this is where the bulk of my data is going to be coming from. If I go to the duration input tab here and click on, or not duration, but the properties page and click on the logging tab, all of my options are going to show up as the choice 1. And if I click on general, you'll see that my accuracy, RT, and response for the actual choice object, or for the actual slide, is going to be related to the choice itself. So yeah, that is all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for coming. I know that I enjoyed it. Hope you guys did as well. Please feel free to like and subscribe to our page, and have a great day.